Thank you, Cindy. I'm not sure what has been going on recently and why it is more true in the last couple of months than it had been previously. And maybe it's just us, but it seems like we have been getting a whole lot more junk calls lately. Have you? We need to just bow our heads and pray about that, I do think. Anyway, but it's some of the same usual suspects, it seems, but in particular, we've gotten a whole lot of calls lately. And I don't know how they're getting cell phone numbers now. It used to be that they weren't calling your cell phone, it'd be on a home number, but now they've infiltrated that, and we've got a number of calls from apparently someone in Pakistan, I think, who is seeking to buy our home, and they keep calling, and so you keep blocking all of these numbers. So you get that, and part of the reason that you wind up answering these calls, if you had any idea, you would just block it, you would decline it, or whatever it is. But one of the challenges is that these numbers typically that show up on your phone, a lot of times they're showing a local area code. And you think, well, okay, this could be something good. And then you answer it, we'd like to talk to you about your vehicle's warranty. Just this past week, 4 times I got a call about my vehicle's warranty. My vehicle is 11 years old. It does not have a warranty, and I'm not interested in buying one of your nonsense warranties. And so all of these calls, they're excessively frustrating, and you just every time that you've answered it, you feel as though you've been hoodwinked. But one of the things likely that you have noticed, though, is that even though they may fool you by generating a caller ID number that is not actually accurate with respect to being a local call, one of the things that I have noticed, 4, maybe 5 count, and because your thought is initially, what's going on? And you keep saying hello, and then about that time, I would like to talk. Anyway, so you're all of a sudden getting the spiel about your car warranty. You're trying to buy your house. Anyway, but I have noticed that hesitation, that pause. As soon as you hear nothing, what you should do is hang up. Immediately, hang up, because that's one of the ways in which they work. I've noticed that's one of the patterns of how it is that they call. You receive calls from telemarketers and solicitors. You receive calls from coworkers. You receive calls from family members. You receive calls from friends. We receive calls from all kinds of people. But it is also true that you receive calls, or there are calls, a phone, landline, cell phone, or whatever is not used when this happens. But there are, for those that are followers of Jesus, regular and frequent calls that God will place on your life. Particular things that He is calling you with, tasks that He is seeking to impress upon your heart, things that He is inviting you to do, particular ways that He's wanting to use you, and there are calls that God puts on your life. And as it is true with how friends call, or even how telemarketers call, there are some commonalities that if you will pause long enough, you can recognize, these are some of the consistent patterns with how it is that God calls others, how it is that God calls potentially me. And I need to pay attention to those patterns. Now today we're starting a new series that we're calling Ups and Downs. And it's going to be a series that's looking at the life of David. And David's life very much is a roller coaster. And there are some really high water moments. And there are some things that are so wonderfully true of him. He is a courageous young warrior. He is a man after God's own heart. He is somebody that is leaning hard and into God, but he's also a murderer. He's also an adulterer. He is also a man with a horribly broken family. His life is like that. And that may sound familiar. And if we pay attention to these lessons, it can have an impact on our lives and our relationship with the Lord. But as we get introduced to David, we get introduced to him because of a call that God puts on his life. And the call that God places on David's life is one that can be and should be instructive for us. So the question we're going to think about specifically today is this: what does God's call on David's life teach me? What does God's call on David's life teach me? We see that call in 1 Samuel chapter 16. If you would look with me in your Bibles there today, 1 Samuel chapter 16, starting with verse 1. It's pretty clear we're picking this up midstream. There's other stuff that's going on. But in verse 1, we're told that the Lord said to Samuel, How long are you going to mourn for Saul, since I have rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I'm sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem because I have selected a king from his sons." Samuel said, "How can I go? Saul will hear about it and kill me." And the Lord answered, "Take a young cow with you and say, 'I have come to sacrifice to the Lord.' Then invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will let you know what you are to do. You are to anoint for me the one I indicate to you." So Samuel did what the Lord directed. He goes to Bethlehem. And when the elders of the town met him, they trembled and said, "Do you come in peace?" "In peace," he said. "I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice." Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and said, "Certainly the Lord's anointed one is before him." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not look at his appearance or his stature, because I have rejected him. Humans do not see what the Lord sees, for humans see what is visible, but the Lord sees the heart." Jesse called Abinadab and presented him to Samuel. "The Lord hasn't chosen this one either," Samuel said. Then Jesse presented Shammah, but Samuel said, "The Lord hasn't chosen this one either." And after Jesse presented 7 of his sons to him, Samuel told Jesse, "The Lord hasn't chosen any of these." And Samuel asked, Are these all the sons you have?" "There is still the youngest," he answered, "but right now he's tending the sheep." Samuel told Jesse, "Send for him. We won't sit down to eat until he gets here." So Jesse sent for him. He had beautiful eyes and a healthy, handsome appearance. And the Lord said, "Anoint him, for he is the one." So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brother. And the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully on David from that day forward. And Samuel went out to Ramah. All right, so we see here the calling of David. And you can say, all right, this is the stuff that happens. But God communicates things to us, and he ensures that things are recorded in his word, not so that we can just say, simply that happened. Okay, that's a nice historical incident. God tells us these things because he wants us to learn from them. He wants us to take these things that have happened, ways in which he has operated, and let that and cause that to have an impact on our life. So we need to ask the question, all right, so this is what is going on as David is called, but what does that teach me? What is God trying to say to me about how it is that he may put a call on my life? Well, based on what we see, there's a couple of things that should be takeaways. And the first is this: my opportunity to serve may exist because of another's failure. My opportunity to serve, or your opportunity to serve, may exist because of another's failure. As verse 1 begins, it's pretty clear we're picking this story up midstream. But in truth, there's more that's going on than just what you see in chapter 15 even. So if you go back with me in your minds, God has initiated a call, first of all, to Abraham. He said, "I'll be your God, you will be my people. Those that come from you, they will be my people." And God wanted to use them as a way in which to bring light into the world, that they would be a light unto the nations. And so as God has raised up this people, there's a lot of stuff that they experience. You remember, for example, that they spent 400 years in slavery in Egypt. You remember that they had the traveling towards the promised land, the wilderness wandering, and then finally taking up and inhabiting the promised land. And throughout the way, there were various leaders that God raised up that he would use as mouthpieces to guide his people. There was, for example, Moses. There was Joshua. There was, for example, what we see here, the prophet Samuel. And so these various individuals that God is speaking through, but Israel starts looking around at the other nations, and they did then what we do today. I kind of like to be like everybody else. Everybody else is wearing those shoes. I'd like those shoes. Everybody else has that color of roof. I'd like that color of roof. And so they wanted to be like every other nation, and every other nation had a king. And so they said, "God, we want a king. We want someone that we can see a crown on their head, and someone that could lead military parades, and someone that we could audibly hear their voice. We want a king so that we could be like the other nations." And God said, "Listen, I promise to be your God. You would be my people. I will be your king. You don't need a king but me." Yeah, we don't really want that. We really, it would be a great idea if we were like all the other nations and had a king. God warned them profusely about the consequences of what this would entail, but they still decided, no, we still want that. That would be great for us. And so God grants them their desire. He grants to them a king. And so the first king of Israel, likely you're aware, is a guy whose name is Saul. And Saul is the one that has been selected, and he is Israel's first king. And as he has been reigning now for a period of years, in chapter 15, we read that God had given Saul some very specific instructions. And the specific instructions had to do with the Amalekites, and they were to completely and utterly destroy this people. There were to be no survivors, and there were to be no spoils of victory. So don't take anything that you gain from this. And Saul knows what the instructions are, very clear, very explicit, and he does what God says, kinda. In fact, ultimately what he does is that he doesn't obey what God has said. He spares their king, and he keeps a stack of the stuff for himself. In chapter 15, God raises up Samuel and leads him to go and confront Saul. And the message is twofold. First of all, you've disobeyed God. What you have done is a clear, flagrant, waving your fist at what God has said, flagrantly disobeying him. So he confronts him with his sin, but secondly, he informs him that this is consequential, that God has decided that he is going to remove his hand of blessing from Saul, and he is going to anoint another person to serve as king. In short, Saul, your reign is going to have an untimely end, and there's not going to be a dynasty that comes from you. It will not be your son and their son and their son and their son and their son that's going to come from you. It stops with you, and your reign stops early. Well, that's bad news. Certainly it is for Saul. And so as we get to chapter 16, Samuel is grieved. I mean, and maybe it is because he thought, I was the guy that anointed Saul in the first place. Maybe this looks bad on me. It's a bad reflection on me. Maybe it is because he just liked Saul personally. We don't know, but he is grieving over what it is that has happened and that has transpired. And so God says to Samuel, how long are you going to hang out here just grieving over one that I have rejected? I've got something for you to do. And he says, I want you to go to Bethlehem. And in Bethlehem, there's a guy named Jesse. And from his sons, I want you to anoint the next king of Israel. And that king will be the one that I show you. Well, keep in mind that Samuel has just announced to the sitting king, you're done. God's going to select another one. And so if word gets out that Samuel is traveling, what do you think Saul might want to do? Well, let's get rid of this joker before he anoints somebody else. And so it is of concern any movement that Samuel makes. And that's why he says to God, wait a minute, if word gets out about me moving about, well, he's going to dispatch his henchmen and I'm a goner. So God says, listen, take an animal with you for sacrifice, and he's going to render a sacrifice, but that's going to be the cover for what he's ultimately going to do, which is to select and anoint Israel's next king. Long story short, he gets to Bethlehem. The elders, the leaders of the town, they're concerned, what are you doing here, Samuel? Because they don't want to be caught up in something where Saul might get them too. And it's like, no, I'm here to sacrifice. But it's interesting that among the leaders in the town, in the city, as the elders are gathered, Jesse is not one of them. This suggests that Jesse is just kind of commoner. He's a commoner. There's nothing particularly special about him. He's like anybody else in Bethlehem. Had his family, had his territory, just kind of keeping his nose down, minding his own business. That's how he's operating. But Samuel sends for Jesse for them to come to the sacrifice. And so they come. And as they come, Eliab is the oldest of Jesse's sons. And when Samuel sees him, he's like, he gives the Fonz, no, that's a, anyway, that was free. Anyway, he says, that's our guy. Surely this must be the Lord's anointed. And so, I'm getting ready. Let me get my oil out. Let me go ahead. I guess these were essential oils. I don't know. But let me get my oils out so that I can anoint him. And God says, no. And there's this important lesson. In fact, it's a hugely consequential statement. Many of you might have even memorized this particular verse that we see in this passage. And he cautions Samuel. He says, listen, you're not looking at him. You're not looking at everybody else the way I do. You're looking at him the way everybody else does. You're looking at the outside. And from the outside, okay, he's the oldest. Well, that means he's got more life experience. Maybe it was that he's the biggest, so, physically he's got stature that looks kind of king-like. And, well, it just kind of stands to reason. So you're just looking at the outside, but I can see, and I'm paying attention to the heart, and I know what's going on in this guy's heart, and he's not going to be Israel's next king. So it wasn't Eliab. And then you start seeing this parade of Jesse's sons that are brought before him. So it's not the first one, it's not the second one, it's not the third one, the fourth one, the fifth one, the sixth one, or the seventh one. At this point, Samuel's probably thinking, is this a clown car at the circus? And finally, the clown car is, there's no more clowns, it seems. So he's concerned. God has said, hey, Jesse, or Samuel, it's one of Jesse's sons, and all of them that are there have shown up. And God says, no. And so he says to Jesse, is there another one? Is that all? And he says, there's the youngest one. And he's not here because he's the youngest, and we needed somebody to watch the sheep, so that's where he's at. And he says, we're not going to even sit down. You send for him. And as David comes, as he presents himself, God confirms to Samuel, this is the one. And then we're told what happens, that he takes this horn of oil, he takes this oil and anoints him to be the next king of Israel. Now, when God does this, what you see him doing is that he is placing a call on David's life. He is calling him to a particular task. He is calling him to service. He is calling him to leave the pasture. He is calling him to leave the farm, and ultimately it's a call for him to be the leader of the nation. Now, God may not call you to lead a nation. He may not call you to leave the farm. He may not call you to leave the town. But consistently it is that those that are in relationship with the Lord, there are specific things that he calls us to. Hopefully already in your life you can say, there are some times where I can say that I felt like God was doing that to me. Maybe even now there's something that you're wrestling with. You feel like God is impressing upon you something that he wants you to be about. But pay attention to what God does here. He's calling David. In his particular case, the calling is to serve a king, and as king, and he is going to wind up serving as Israel's second king. Why is that? The simple reason is because of Saul's failure. There is a call on David's life because there was a failure in Saul's life. Why is that noteworthy? Why is that simple thought of consequence? Let me explain it this way. When I was a kid, it wasn't one of my favorite shows, but it was one that I did watch. I'm not exactly sure when it aired, sometime probably in the early 80s. Some of you remember it. It was called Grizzly Adams. And Grizzly Adams was about, I think it was set like in the 1800s kind of, and you got this guy that lives out in the wilderness, and he's got a pet bear. Remember that name, Ben? I don't know how that worked, but anyway, so I guess where the whole grizzly thing comes from. But so he's got this bear. But then there was this old crusty curmudgeon in the show whose name was Jack. And Jack always went around not on a mighty steed, not on a stallion, but on a donkey. And donkeys are kind of known for their stubbornness. And in this particular show, Jack's donkey was particularly stubborn. And the donkey had an interesting name. The donkey, if you remember, his name was Number 7. And he's always fussing at the donkey, and he's always doing this. He's always threatening the donkey with what? Number 8. And the reason that there kept being another number is because of some failure of the donkey before. This is very simple, but it is important. The reason that there is a call on David's life to serve as the king, to be number 2, is because number 1 failed. Why is that important? Because it tells me, it should have told David, it should remind us that God can put a call on my life. He can task me with something, And I can even begin that, and then by my choices, I can sully or ruin that opportunity. Saul's reign is going to come to an early end. Saul's not going to have a dynasty. And it's not because God didn't want to give it to him, and it's certainly not because God lacked the ability to grant it to him. It was because of Saul's failure. And then God puts a call on David's life. He calls him to be now number 2. There shouldn't be a number 2 at this point. Saul's not too old. He hasn't died, but he has been a failure because of his flagrant disobedience to God. This should serve as a warning. It should be instructive to me. It should be instructive to all of us. If you have a relationship with Christ and you're following him, there are particular things that he's going to call you to. But it may very well be, and you should pay attention to when this happens, that the opportunity that God calls you to, there may be a vacancy in that because of the failure of another. That should serve as a warning, because if it could happen to them, it could happen to you. And just because it is that God puts a call on your life does not mean that you're operating under the cone of safety and shelter so that you can't ever mess this up. You absolutely can. You absolutely can. So as you have been operating in obedience, as you have been following the Lord, it's important to continue doing that. Just because he's given you a call doesn't mean that you can't screw it up. Saul did, and it was a warning to David as well. What do I learn from this? What should we learn from it? That my opportunity and that your opportunity to serve, it may very well exist because of another's failure. But there's another lesson that we should learn, and that's this. God's call and my deployment may not be simultaneous. God's call and my deployment may not be simultaneous. In verse 13, Samuel takes his horn of oil, he anoints David in the presence of his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully on that day, on David from that day forward. We don't know how old David is at this point. He's probably a young guy. It's believed that he could be 10, 12, 15, somewhere, a younger teen. Certainly not where he would have been old enough where when the elders are gathered and when Jesse is invited, he's not invited to this sacrifice. So it says, hey, he's younger, and there's this what is deemed to be a comparatively menial task, watching the sheep. We'll just leave David with the sheep. But this is the one that God leads Samuel to say, hey, this is the king. An hour before this happened, David is twiddling his thumbs in the field. An hour before this happened, David is just listening to sheep baa. An hour before this, David is watching his step. An hour before this, David is looking for threatening animals. But now, he's just heard, you will be the king of Israel. Holy cow. This is a big deal. This is enormously consequential. He's going to be leaving corrals and barns and shanties for the palace. He's going to be leaving siblings, and he's going to be the king. He's going to be the sovereign of an entire nation. That's hugely consequential. And it's not just any nation. He gets to be the king over the nation of Israel, God's chosen people. And God has specifically called and specifically tasked him with this. And as chapter 16 concludes, what you read is, and we didn't look at this, but Samuel winds up going to the palace. He's been on the farm, now he goes to the palace. But he doesn't go to the palace as the king. In fact, the reason that he goes is because Saul is having trouble sleeping. And the thought is, maybe if we could have some music playing, and maybe sometimes you like to have some noise playing while you're sleeping. If we'd have some pleasant music, like, a banjo or something that could help him go to sleep. And somebody says, hey, I know a guy who's really good on a lyre, L-Y-R-E. It's like a harp. What do you think about a harp? That's kind of pleasant. I think I can go to sleep to that. So let's send for him. And so David is brought to the palace as a hireling so that he gets to sit there and play while Saul snores. But when the king awakes, there's maybe something that he can do as well. We'll make him carry the king's armor as well. Saul winds up having his successor, unbeknownst to him, right there in the palace with him. David woke up that particular morning and was tending sheep. An hour later, he is told that he's going to be the next king of Israel. And it seems that it's a very short period of time later, days later, weeks after, he is in the palace, but he's not in the palace as king. He's going to be king. He's going to be presented as the king. He will have a crown. He will have position and authority. But it won't be the next week. It won't be the next month. It's not going to be the next year. In fact, it's believed that somewhere between 10 and 15 years later is when David actually becomes the king. Oh, wait a minute. Did God get ahead of himself? I mean, what's going on here in this particular chapter? Did he get busy and forget that, I've tasked David to be the king, and just forget to kind of have the whole installation thing? Did God forget about this? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. David was going to be going through a whole ton of circumstances, and many of these we're going to look at in the coming weeks. And he's going to be hunted. He is going to be a commander. He is going to experience success. He is going to experience unparalleled fear. He is going to be using all of those things. But hear me in this. God was using all of those things to prepare him for actually becoming the king. Pay attention to this. The timing of David's calling and his position, or being positioned as the king, space between it. In his case, it was years. In my case, in your case, it could be years. It could be decades. It could be months. It could be weeks. It could be hours. Just understand that God's call on your life and his actual deployment of you into service, they may not occur simultaneously. It may not happen at the same time. We moved to our current house 10 years ago. In fact, it was on my 40th birthday that we moved there. And this house has been such a blessing for us because of the space that it has. It's a ranch, but it's got a full basement. And I remember when we saw it the first time, it's got these bedrooms downstairs, and we just could hear angels singing as we saw all that space because of all these kids that we've got. And so it's been a colossal blessing to us. Our house, though, was built, I think, in 1961. And so there were some things that, with respect to how buildings were and homes were constructed at that point, that are different today. One of which is that plaster as opposed to sheetrock was used. So our house is filled with plaster walls. Not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it can be a good thing because plaster is very sound protective. And so it keeps sound from transmitting. Well, that's a problem with kids because we need to get their attention. And so very quickly we moved there and we realized, Caroline and I we're doing an awful lot of hollering. Hey, neighbor! Adam! And we're doing all this hollering, and it would be okay if it worked, but it didn't. So you're busting a lung, and you're still not getting their attention. And it was at that point, and this is about the time as well, though, too, that these things were becoming quite common. But we got some of those Google smart speakers. You know, the little, you can say, hey, Google, and there's Amazon was, I guess, the first to market with their little Echo device. But the reason that we specifically got those is because they can work like poor man's intercom. And you can place those throughout the house, and you can say to one of them, I'm almost afraid to say it, my watch, you can say, hey, and then you can say broadcast, and it will broadcast your message throughout the house. So that's cool, though. So you can say, hey, it's time to wake up, and it'll start saying good morning, and ring, and then like tell everybody to wake up. Or you can say a particular message, or you can call out for somebody, hey, Andrew, I need you to come upstairs, whatever, something like that. But in fact, virtually every day we use this. In fact, when I get home here in a little bit, we'll probably use this when it's time to eat. And so there won't be people in the kitchen because there's work going on there, and so it'll be time to eat, and you'll want to get everybody in there. And so you'll say, and then you'll say this, ring the dinner bell. And it actually, you'll hear, ding, 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 and it'll say, it's time for dinner. And they start coming out of the woodwork. All right, so they come to the kitchen, and this has happened repeatedly. They come to the kitchen, and sometimes you will hear a voice of frustration because they come in and they see that stuff is still cooking. There's stuff still on the stove, and like, I thought it was time to eat. Why'd you call us? Because we need you to put cups out. Because we need you to put forks out. Because we need you to get a roll of paper. We need you to do something. And once that's in place, it'll be time to eat. Okay. But they come up there frustrated because they've heard the call. It's time to eat. You're invited to dinner. You're invited to have a meal. And they come up discovering, wait a minute, it's not quite time, and what I need to do is what? Prepare. I need to prepare. So many times it is the case that when God puts a call on your life to do something, whether it's vocational ministry, whether it is something more basic, to marriage, to parenthood, to a particular job, to a particular city, to a particular whatever. A million different ways that God puts calls on people's life. The timing from when he calls to when he actually sends, it may not occur simultaneously. And you need to pay attention to that. Because when he calls and when he delays from deployment, that time is not to be wasted. It is not useless. It is useful, and it may very well be that that's the season that God is wanting to use and for you to use to make sure that you're fully prepared for the work that he's called you to. He hasn't forgotten. He's not wasting time, so you don't waste that time. The truth is that if you have a personal relationship with Christ, he has and continues to call you. He calls me. He calls us to all kinds of stuff. And it may very well be that you feel that there's some particular burden that God is putting on your life with respect to this particular season, to this particular place, to this particular task. And though he's not calling you to serve as king, he's calling you to something different. Well, pay attention. It's possible that what he's calling you to may exist because of someone else's failure. You'd better pay attention to that. If it could happen to them, it could happen to you. But it may be that he's calling you something, but it's not quite ready. Maybe you're not quite ready. Don't waste the time. Use it so that you are fully prepared for the work that he's called you to. Will you bow your heads with me?